Welcome back. We are joined here today by Scott Ritter, a former U.S. Marine, intelligence analyst, and UN weapons inspector. So thank you very much for coming on. We see now that the United States has released this new national security strategy, which has seemingly taken most by surprise, especially the Europeans. However, you more or less predicted that the US was going to go this direction about 8 months ago. How do you make sense of this new security strategy?
Well, I mean, this is exactly what Donald Trump said he was going to do. I mean, it doesn't take rocket science to go back and listen to Donald Trump. Um, Listen to him during the campaign, listen to him as he spoke about what his priorities were. You're right. Back in April, I spoke to this issue and I said that the number one priority of the United States will be Fortress America to secure the Western Hemisphere for America. I said the next most important front would be China, to shift resources that weren't going to be allocated to security of the Western Hemisphere to the Pacific to stand up to China there. That the United States would de-emphasize its military engagement in both Europe and the Middle East. This wasn't me, making things up out of thin air. This was simply assessing the statements made by the Trump administration. And, you know, we are now, gosh, what, 10 months into the Trump presidency. There are certain patterns that are appearing because, look, you're analytically inclined. I know you are. I follow you. I listen to you. Um, and if you're analytically inclined, the Trump administration has to be one of the most singularly frustrating entities to follow and evaluate because if you do short-term plotting, they're all over the map. I mean, one day they say this, the next day they say something else, they say it again, they say it again, and it's very frustrating. But when you examine these data points over time, you find that they inexorably point in the direction that Trump says he wants to go. It's just that he's not going from A to to Z directly. He is going all over the map, and um, it's difficult. But if you assess Trump over the long term, everything he said he wanted to accomplish, the directions he wanted to go, that's the direction he's heading. And the national security strategy document is reflective of this reality. Um, Also, keep in mind that, he tasked his national security team with the production of this document back in April. So, the guidance that was given for the production of this document remained consistent, and therefore there's no surprises that this document says what it does.
Well, I'm thinking if you switch from you recognize that the world has switched from unipolarity to multipolarity and you have to prioritize places, it does make a lot of sense. That is, first priority is, well, shore up your own hemisphere, that is, the Western Hemisphere. Then, of course, confront the main adversary, which is in Asia, China primarily. And if you pivot to those places, you pivot away. So that's Europe, which is getting the, well, I guess, short end of the stick. So a lot of this makes sense, but there's a lot of focus on ideology as well, though. How do you make sense of this? Or they call for reducing the role of ideology, to be more specific.
When you take a look at, again, evaluating the Trump administration over time, um, go back to the last national security strategy document that was promulgated by the Biden administration. In it, they build a world vision that is predicated on the defense of the rules-based international order. That's was the sacred mantra of everything American. And from that came the defense of democracy, American democracy imposed on other nations as the gold standard. Um, Donald Trump gave a number of very telling speeches during his campaign in which he rejected the rules-based international order and he rejected the notion that America has a right to dictate things, outcomes to other nations based upon, American principles, values, etc. Um, He said the place for American values is at home. That's where we need to defend them, at home. Um, and if we shouldn't be projecting them out of our shores if we haven't fully defended them at home, that's a little bit hypocritical. Remember one of the answers about to a question he gave, Putin is a killer. He said, "Well, we've killed a lot of people too." You know, um, very pragmatic, realistic answer. I would say that it shouldn't take anybody by surprise that you know uh, Trump, when evaluating the world we live in, is more interested in the practicalities, um, economic relations, who we invest our money in, why are we investing money to places, and there's a difference between telling people what you have to do, which Trump says that's not our role, and giving people money. Trump's like, I'm going to give you money if you align with us, if you're on our side, if you're doing what we want, if you do what we believe in, then you can get money. When it comes to Europe right now, I mean, let's just look at, again, a simplistic analogy, but we'll use it nonetheless, or a simplistic, mechanism of explanation. NATO claims to be all about America. I mean, my God, the Secretary General of NATO can't, he just falls over himself to praise America and the role that America plays, the leadership role, especially when we tell NATO how much money they have to spend. That we must spend this money because Daddy told us to. Okay, that's one way. Now, then there's the European Union, which is as anti-American as the day is long. Let's just be honest about it. I can dig through all European Union statements. They are anti-American. They're fundamentally anti-American. And it's not just the fact that they're posturing themselves as a global competitor to the United States. They don't like us. They simply don't like us. They belittle us. I read their stuff. I'm not, this to be true. Go into the web pages of any one of these European parliamentarians that fly the blue flag and the gold stars and posture themselves as to be the moral equivalent or superior of the United States of America. They hate the United States of America and they despise Americans. We're only useful when we do what they want us to do, but they don't like it. Look, some of the times they don't like us for cause. I mean, America's a war power and a warmongering nation. Yep, guilty as charged. But then don't pretend to be our friend when you put on your NATO hat. Because the same people that condemn us when they wear their EU hat are the same people that are embracing us when they were in their NATO hat. This is a fundamental inconsistency that the Trump administration's fed up with. And the other thing is when we sit down with Europe and try and say, who do we want to align ourselves with? We don't want to align ourselves with people who, A, denigrate us. If you don't like America, guess what? We don't like you either. So, we shall go our own ways. But, the other thing is, if you act in a way that is against core American values, then don't expect us to embrace you either. And freedom of speech is a core American value. And it certainly isn't being practiced in Europe today in many locations. Interference in elections. I mean, you guys, Europeans, wake up. This is Donald Trump. Okay, he believes fervently that the election was stolen from him in 2020. He knows, and this is an absolute, that the Democrats sought to undermine his 2016 candidacy. All right, so now you're running around playing stupid games in Romania, Moldova. You're seeking to outlaw a political party in Germany, and you want the United States, you want this president to be silent? No, you're anti-American by definition. And this is the national security strategy of the United States that seeks to promote American security interests. So don't be surprised that we've turned against Europe. And this is a fundamental turn. This isn't, a little lover's spat. This isn't a quarrel that will be papered over. This is of a fundamental nature. Europe is on a pathway, according to the Trump administration, to civilizational erasure. That means you're gone. You're doing it to yourself. We have decided that we will try to get those European nations, not the European Union, not the European community, those European nations that are worth saving on the right trajectory. But NATO is finished. I hope people understand that too, because the Trump administration has said There are members of NATO today who don't reflect the cultural values and realities of the nations that signed the charter. And therefore, they are incompatible with what we believe should be defended under the charter. It's over, finished, done, goodbye.
Yeah, it is interesting though how well, not just the EU, but the Europeans often view Americans, because it's in very much human nature to always divide, who are we and who are them, the in-group and the out-group. And whenever we talk about us Europeans, then the Americans, there's often this very derogatory language, like you said, hostile in many ways. But as soon as you introduce the Russians, then the Americans are suddenly part of us, and then they're celebrated. But when it's only the two of us, then there's a very strange, yeah,
Yeah, can I just remind you, European
distaste.
audience, who we are? We liberated you, son of a bitches.
No,
Okay, we liberated you. Russia did too. Russia liberated the East. We liberated the West. We rebuilt your sorry asses. You wouldn't be here today if it weren't for us. We're not perfect. We never claimed to be perfect. We're Americans. But my God, we went across the ocean to save your sorry asses, and we buried 100,000 plus Americans doing so. And I also want to remind the Germans of a harsh reality too. Familiarize yourselves with Article 53 of the United Nations Charter. Not too many people know what it is, but it's the article that speaks of enemy states, and it gives every nation in the world the right to pound your ass into the dirt if you seek to re-embrace aggressive policies that should have been erased from your DNA at the end of the Second World War. Germany today, in speaking about getting the largest army and preparing for war with Russia, these are aggressive policies. And I don't think the Russians have forgotten what Article 53 is. And hey, guys, J.D. Vance and company, they're looking at it too. You're the enemy of America. Literally, you are defined by the United Nations Charter as an enemy state. And when you seek to promulgate aggressive policies, don't be surprised when those who buried their fathers, uncles, sons in the soil of Europe to save your sorry asses suddenly decide maybe it's time to bury you instead. This is fundamental, guys. Europe better wake the hell up, because America's waking up. We're sick and tired of sending money your way, of saving your asses, only to have you sit there and spit in our face. Look, there's ways to criticize America. We deserve to be criticized. We are not perfect. We have done a lot of things wrong. And I have no problem with people holding us to account. But when you owe your very existence to the blood of Americans, you better bite your tongue when you start to say certain things, or don't be surprised when we turn around and hold you to account. And that's what's happening today. You're being held to account by a generation of Americans who are tired of playing the game. We're not going to underwrite your security with a blank check anymore. And we're not going to stand by idly while you plot against us.
there's an interesting comparison though, because with the Russians, they often commented on this dishonesty too. That is, when the Europeans go to Moscow, they talk about their security, their aspiration, and they kind of show some understanding. Yeah, no, we can work together. And then when they come back to Brussels, the language has changed completely, and it's a little bit like with Trump, I guess. When they meet him, it's, oh, thank you, Daddy, for convincing us to spend more on the military. But then, of course, when they're back in Brussels, they don't hide the contempt for him. So it's very fake, the way they approach it.
Disingenuous.
Yeah. But it's an interesting aspect of this, because I think you make a great point that this should have been predictable, that Trump would have, I guess, identified himself close with the Le Pens and the AfD and the Romania, Moldova, all the essentially opposition, which has been sidelined, given that he saw this is what happened to him. But there's a comment though within the national security strategy that the intention to cultivate resistance to this downward trajectory of Europe. How do you interpret this? Do you think there's going to be more efforts to actively challenge the authority of people like Merz and Macron and Starmer and the likes?
I think Yeah, it's over for Merz. Again, I just want to remind the German people who follow you that Merz is the leader of an enemy state. Okay, this is a reality. You don't get to rebuild your military, not with your history. So Merz is history. He's finished, and the efforts among the Germans to suppress the democratic, um, free will in Germany is not going unnoticed as well. AFD, whatever you think about AFD, um, you know, an increasingly large number of Germans think that that's the direction they want to go. Um, and we'll see what happens. I can't predict the future, but I would imagine that a Germany where if you look at the demographic division of support, AFD is very popular in the former eastern um, sectors of Germany. Maybe Germany doesn't deserve to be a unified state. Maybe the future of Germany is to be a divided state. Um, and that might be the direction the United States starts pushing. Again, Germany, beware, you're the enemy. We're not going to allow you to suppress democracy, suppress free speech, and exist as a unified whole that is seeking to, head back down the path of the Third Reich, it isn't going to be permitted. And if you want to do this, remember, we are looking to the Russians now, according to national security strategy, as partners in stability, not friends. We're not best friends. I mean, I personally believe that we could be and we should be, but Trump's not there yet. But Trump is talking. They didn't talk about Russia as an adversary or an enemy. Russia was a partner of stability. And therefore, anything that seeks to undermine this strategic decision to have a stable relationship with Russia becomes the enemy. In Germany, you're now the enemy. You're the official enemy of the United States. Get used to it. France, the same thing. I mean, Macron actively conspiring against the United States right now. Starmer, the same thing. I mean, there was a rumor going out that they're talking about divesting themselves of American treasuries. Uh, Play the game. Really. I mean, there's the old fool around and then you will find out. We will crush you. We will destroy you. That will be the end of Europe. If you want to play this game, we will do it because there's no love lost here. We don't like you anymore. I mean, we always came to you. We point to go to France and tour Paris. We thought it was cool to go to Germany and drink beer. And both in Germany, we used to have American soldiers living there. They fell in love with German women. They, brought them home. We have, families of children that come from American German, relationships. The same thing in England. We have a long, storied history with the British, but we also kicked the English out of America back in the day, and we don't believe in the king. We're not going to tolerate any nonsense from Europe. That's just the way it's going to be. So yeah, I think you're going to see a very active role of the United States going forward in promoting those political elements in Europe that align with our ideals and our values, and working actively against those who conspire against us. And so, yeah, if you're Starmer, if you're Macron, if you're Merz, be on notice. You're our enemy now because you made yourself our enemy.
I think back in February, when at the Munich Security Conference, then when J.D. Vance made this speech, I think many Europeans were caught a bit off guard and thought that it was just J.D. Vance was, blowing off some steam. I don't think they saw the deep foundations in this in terms of how this rift is growing between the U.S. and Europe. But besides threatening to deinvest from the U.S., we had now the former EU foreign policy chief, Josep Borrell, who argued that, why are we still pretending America's a friend? Trump is our enemy. This train has now left the station, it seems. How do you see, well, you mentioned before that NATO is done, but how do you see this like in the short and medium term? Well, not short, but medium term already, because this rhetoric is becoming quite mutually aggressive. And also, I saw this news article headline in I forgot which one, a British newspaper, that the Europeans are, they're walking a tightrope because they want to be friendly to Trump, but they still want to, they say help Ukraine, which means to prolong the war and undermine Trump's peace agreement by convincing Zelensky not to take it. But But so in other words, they want to tell Daddy how great he is. At the same time, they're trying to sabotage what he's doing. I mean, this how long can this go on before Trump responds? Do you think? Do you see some escalation coming this way?
Yeah, I see that. You know, this can spin out of control very fast, very fast. What I see happening is that Trump is going to use the tools of divide and conquer. There are certain European nations that can't live without the United States. Poland. Poland is not going to walk away from the United States. Germany has already made a strategic decision to walk away. So in the short term, I think you're going to see the transfer of American assets out of Germany into Poland or back to the United States. But I think you're going to see the United States divest itself of Germany. And this is fundamental. It's the end of NATO. The United States is already, if you notice that Marco Rubio didn't attend the NATO ministerial, it's the kiss of death. The other thing that's happening is that we are beginning to pull out of some of the foundational, you know, infrastructure of NATO, logistical planning, communications. NATO can't have a large scale military exercise without the United States involvement. We're not going to be involved. We're going to start to withdraw a whole bunch of critical support to NATO while we'll still be in NATO. We're just going to tell the Europeans, you gotta do it. And Europe can't do it. Europe doesn't have logistical infrastructure that can unify Europe. They don't have a communications framework that can unify Europe. They were relying on the United States for this forever. And so then as Europe starts to collapse, the expense of sustaining NATO without the United States becomes prohibitive. And nations are going to opt out, especially when the United States offers them bilateral security arrangements. And this is what's going to be the end of NATO when the United States moves away from collective security. And we already have. Scott Bessent made it clear that if Russia attacks NATO, we're not going to come screaming in with troops. We'll be willing to sell you some equipment. Maybe. That's it. Of course, that's all that's required under Article 5. People haven't read it very closely if they think that it automatically requires us to send troops in. But we're done with that. So we are getting to a situation where if a European nation behaves irresponsibly and provokes Russia and Russia attacks it, that there isn't going to be a collective response by NATO because NATO can't collectively respond without the United States. And we're opting out of that. We view Europe as an irresponsible entity right now. So I think you're going to see us making individual bilateral security deals with individual European states and opting out of security arrangements with others. And that's the end of collective defense, which that means the end of NATO. And this can happen as soon as this summer. So, yeah, I mean, again, be careful what you ask for, Europe, because you may very well get it. And in the case of America walking away from you, it's already happened. It's done.
Well, some good developments could come from this, though, because one of the problems often recognized, at least by many academics in the 90s, was all these countries, the Baltic states, for example, when you're a small country bordering massive Russia, you would have a systemic incentive to seek some reconciliation. However, with the US and NATO behind them, they instead could take the luxury of pursuing some historical vengeance or, well, essentially a country like Estonia with 1.5 million. To have such a hostile policy towards Russia, it doesn't really make much sense. It's very suicidal. And, instead of calming them down, we handed over the car keys to them by making Kaja Kallas the EU foreign policy chief, which is an extraordinary thing to do. But no, so there might be some, if the US is more ambiguous about the extent to which it would help Europe, perhaps it could tone down some of the more radical element, and maybe some of the Europeans would rediscover diplomacy. But if you were sitting in Moscow, though, and you're now opening this document of the US new national security strategy, how would you make sense of this? Or what would it mean for you?
If I put on a hypothetical Russian hat, the first thing I do is I say, this is strategically the right direction the U.S. should be heading. A pragmatic, realistic foreign policy that finally recognizes that Russia is not the enemy. There are things in this document that would be disturbing to the Russians, of course. The whole Monroe Doctrine concept, uh, puts Russia in a difficult spot vis-a-vis Cuba, Nicaragua, Venezuela, and same thing with China getting involved. But all in all, it's the right direction. But then I say, well, yeah, but um, come November, Trump's got midterm elections. Is Trump sustainable as a political force? I mean, how much credence do we want to give a document that could be undermined, um, in terms of policy implementation after November if a new Democratic controlled House were to be empowered? Then Trump would find himself in a repeat of his last 2 years of his first presidency: impeachment, 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 impeachment. It would be the end of the Trump presidency. And then there's no guarantee about, is J.D. Vance going to be able to replace Trump? That becomes problematic. So I'd be careful there. Then, you know, if the Republicans or pro-Trump Republicans can retain control of the House and the Senate, that becomes different but even then, you have to say, is J.D. Vance electable? Is Donald Trump just a unique phenomena that once he's off the ballot, is J.D. Vance electable? Or are we going to get a throwback? And so I would say that the Russians really can't get too excited about this document until 2028, and see what happens in 2028. In the short term, though, I think it shows Russia that they are on the right path when it comes to Ukraine. That as opposed to their reticence about, a ceasefire, et cetera, alienating the Trump administration, it's only compelled the Trump administration to recognize pragmatically, the Russian reality. And that appears to be what Trump has done. And so if I were the Russians, I would be cautiously optimistic about this document. But you also have to remember that it was the Trump administration that lied about, Russia cheating in the INF treaty, pulled out of the INF treaty. Trump lied about the JCPOA and pulled out of that agreement. The United States can't be trusted. Even with Trump going in this new direction, I think the Russians will always hold back a little bit because is this the truth? Or is this just, a short-term act designed to, assuage a certain political reality, which once those ruffled feathers have been soothed, you'll see Trump change course again. Is Trump a trusted interlocutor? Is the United States a trusted interlocutor? And right now, the answer in Russia is a decisive no to both.
Yeah, I think many still remember that reset button, which meant nothing. so there is a lack of trust, of course. But
Well, it meant more than nothing because it wasn't just a mistake. The reset button was subterfuge because the policy was regime change. They weren't seeking to reset relations with Russia. They were seeking to keep Vladimir Putin out of the presidency. They were seeking to empower Medvedev so that Medvedev would block Putin's return. They were seeking the demise of Vladimir Putin, the empowerment of Medvedev, with the hopes that Medvedev could be brought into line a la Yeltsin. So this wasn't a reset. This was a redefinition. This was regime change. And the Russians know that. This wasn't a simple mistake. There's a difference between people executing bad policy. I mean, everybody makes mistakes, but this was deception on the part of the United States, outright deception, with the most nefarious intent to collapse, Russia as it had emerged under the leadership of Vladimir Putin and to return Russia to the decade of the 1990s. And that's deeply insulting to the Russian people who remember what the reality of the 1990s was.
Yeah, I feel like for the younger audience, they should know that because now when you see Dmitry Medvedev, he's very hawkish and he's the pit bull essentially that yeah, plays the bad cop almost to Putin. But I remember when I lived in Russia in 2011, 12, when a lot of Russians saw him as Medvedev as being weak because as this was seen in the West as well, he was seen as a bit soft, liberal, a bit very pro-Western, someone you can bring on board, which is a testimony, I guess, to how the relationship has been mismanaged. If you see the fury and the anger that he carries with him now towards Europe. But how does this national security strategy translates into the end of the Ukraine war? What would you do if you're Zelensky reading this document? Because it does seem as if um, yeah, there's that the U.S. is now ready to completely wash its hands with with Ukraine. Of course, as you said, it could be an act as well that is to simply put pressure. But assuming that it does reflect the genuine ideas of the Trump administration, what would you, how would you think that this would impact Zelensky's government?
Fatally. This is the end of Zelensky. He can't survive without American support. There's some critical things happening or getting ready to happen in Ukraine that are related to the budget. And, if Ukraine can't find a way to gain access to, 120 to 150 billion dollars in the short term, there will be a political crisis of existential proportions, which Zelensky may not survive. So right off the bat, you have this reality, an economic reality, which becomes a political reality. You layer over that the fact that the Ukrainian army is just being routed on the battlefield. Every day gets worse, and it's not going to change. It's not going to reverse. Zelensky, instead of doing the smart thing, which would be to go to Trump and say, "Forgive me, Daddy. The prodigal son has returned, and I'm here to do whatever Daddy wants to make this war go away." He instead is aligning himself with the Europeans, who Trump just declared war on through his national security strategy document. And all the Europeans are doing and continue to support Zelensky is prove Trump's point that they don't care about, the things that America cares about. We don't want more war with Russia. We want stable relations with Russia. And yet Europe is becoming, a war party collective. And Zelensky appears to be aligning himself fully with that, rejecting outright some of the core demands made in the peace plan that Trump has put forward. I don't believe this will endear him to Trump. And I think that you're going to see that the United States is going to increasingly cut its ties with Zelensky. And in doing so, empower the Russians to continue their military advance unfettered by American political or economic interference. And you're going to also find out that Europe can't live up to its promises, that anything they say about supporting Ukraine is empty, because ultimately Europe can't do anything of fundamental value without the support of the United States. And we won't support European policies that continue to push for, endless war with Russia.
Yeah, that sounds a bit like what the former press secretary of Zelensky said as well. Like, why are we allowing essentially the Europeans to convince us to keep going? They don't have the weapons, they don't have the intentions to join in, they don't have the economy, and also they don't even have the political clout. They're not even talking to the Russians. So there's no, well, not just her. There's others as well in Ukraine now who is questioning why follow the Europeans on this, because it's not help if you just luring them into prolonging the war, but without any prospect of succeeding. Now, well, you didn't mention you mentioned Americas, that is with the Monroe Doctrine, that which makes sense. If it's a multipolar world, you have the rise of China, you want to at least cement control over your own backyard. So, of course, it's going to have very unfortunate consequences for countries like Venezuela. But the last country, though, is China. how are you assessing this? Because on one hand, it does seem as if Trump is yes, got very was belligerent approach towards China. On the other hand, he's not that ideological, which is often I guess, a good indication. That is, if you see everything as being, forces of light versus forces of darkness, then it's just going to be hammering each other. There's not going to be a solution. There's not going to be compromise. Or are you reading the China segments of the security strategy differently?
I think the Chinese portion, Trump got ahead of himself. They jumped to, something they call conventional overmatch in terms of military capabilities, and that this will serve as the ultimate deterrent against China. Um, I mean, that's an important statement because it means that the United States isn't relying upon its nuclear deterrence to deter China. We're talking about conventional military power. But when I take a look at the number of ships that are produced by America per year in our shipyards and compare and contrast it to the number of ships that China's producing in their shipyards, um, I just wonder how we're going to get to conventional military overmatch when the Chinese are going to be able to grow, um, exponentially faster than we are. Um, I think there will be a lot of posturing, peace through strength kind of posturing. But the reality is that this is a situation that'll be resolved economically, and that, the state of the global economic health will largely influence how Trump postures vis-a-vis China. But I think there's a recognition in reading the national security strategy that the American and Chinese economies are, interwoven to the extent that a trade war is impractical and a real war would be suicidal. So I I think there was a lot of strong words put in there, but the next document that needs to be produced in this cycle of documents is I think it's the National Military Strategy of the United States, put out by the Department of Defense/War, depending on how you feel about these things. Um, and that document will, lay out the military priorities based upon it. It'd be interesting to see how the military um, divides its resources and prioritizes how it employs its resources, in the Pacific. What specifically is going to be asked of the military, and can the military, bring these resources to bear in a timely fashion, or are we talking, an extended period of time? Europe, the disengagement from Europe. What resources will be allocated to defense of the homeland of the Western Hemisphere. Um, this is the next, step, is to find out how this document plays out in terms of follow-on policy. But, you know, in the same thing with nuclear policy, we have to see how, how that shapes out.
My last question, though, is just how you see the possible drop-offs among the European states. That is, you mentioned that the EU, either the EU or Europe, is now considered to be an enemy, and well, it doesn't seem that it doesn't seem like an exaggeration, really. Again, I would encourage people to actually read this document, where the European leaders are referred to as being authoritarian, undemocratic, essentially crushing political opposition, media, and dissent. So it does, and also when you add the aspect of seeking to cultivate opposition to reverse all of this, it well, it does come off as yeah, that this is now not just a drifting apart, but an actual possible confrontation. But Europe, no matter how much we talk about Europe as an entity, it's the EU itself has 27 member states, and for some, like Hungary, they're under great pressure and being punished often by the EU, by the Germans. So there's going to be some drop-offs. You mentioned Poland, of course, that they have, for good reasons, they want to have America. Well, they will favor America over, for example, the Germans. But how do you see this conflict between the EU and the United States? How would this affect the cohesion, you think, of Europe? because it's not as if all of the European countries are going to stand up and let's de-invest from America. We'll stand together. We seem to be able to unite around a common hatred of Russia, but even there, we seem to break up a little bit with Fico, Orban, going their own way. But to unite somehow against America, which the former EU foreign policy chief suggested, it doesn't seem likely.
No, again, if Europe tries to do this, it's the end of Europe. Because, as you said, there will not be consensus. Nations will peel away. There will be different points of view, and the United States will exploit all of these. And we will exploit it to the detriment of Europe. But what will happen is Europe will fracture among a number of fault lines, and the United States will be in the business of picking friends and picking enemies. And it depends on which side of the fence you decide you want to be on. But I can guarantee you this outcome, that if you choose to go against America, you do so at your own detriment. There's not a single European nation that will confront the United States decisively and emerge victorious. The government that does that will not exist. We are very good at regime change. It's what we do. And if you don't think we can target European countries, then you don't know anything about our history in Europe. Ask the French, ask the Italians, ask the Germans, ask anybody. The history of American covert and overt interference in the democratic processes of Europe is a long and storied one. And we will be more than happy. Every one of your capital cities has an American embassy in it. And you've allowed the United States to build up very large CIA stations in these respective embassies. What do you think they're there to do? To hold hands and sing Kumbaya? To be your friends? No, they are there to implement the policy directives given to them by the President of the United States. And one of the main things they do is political action. And they will actively be undermining any government that dares vocalize opposition to Donald Trump and the government of the United States. So it's over. You picked the wrong enemy. We're not an outsider that doesn't know anything about you. We built you. We created you. We clothed you. We fed you. We taught you how to crawl, taught you how to walk, taught you how to run, taught you how to talk. There's not an aspect of European society that we aren't intimately familiar with and don't intimately control, either directly or indirectly. You picked the wrong enemy. You have zero ability to influence the United States. We have maximum opportunity to influence Europe. This is not a fight you want to fight, but if you do want to fight it, the outcome will be guaranteed. You will lose, and losing will not be pretty, because we will collapse you. We will collapse you politically, and if you want to play the harder game, we'll collapse you economically. We will be the ruin of Europe, if that's the game Europe wants to play.
Yeah, I remember I had a talk with Richard Sakwa and other academics all on this podcast about 6 months ago, and it's more of a hypothetical question whether or not the political West might be coming to an end. But this is it's very hard to read this in a very different way if you see the sentiment now on both sides. So there has to be. I'm not sure what you foresee as being what replaces the political West. Do we see a redefinition of the relationship and amicable divorce? Because the Europeans, we kind of made ourselves very dependent on U.S. technologies, industries, payment systems, and banks and security. This is going to be often if you're the adversary, be it China or Russia, you have the incentive to create a lot of strategic autonomy. Given that, with 80 years of such close relations, we made ourselves very dependent. So to go this strongly against the United States now, it does seem like a mistake. That is, you would need at least 10, 20 years to have some independence before you try to pull such a move, I think. But
look, the United States, they made it clear their number one priority is security of the Western Hemisphere. And Europe's not part of the Western Hemisphere. You're a number 3 priority, and we view you in a negative fashion in this national security strategy. You are, in many ways, the enemy. to the extent that, Europe will be linked to America, again, there will be the haves and the have-nots. But the haves with those, I think Europe's future is to be a quasi-colonial enterprise of the United States. We will seek to divide and conquer, and we will bring certain nations under our umbrella, but it won't be a favorable relationship. Um, you will be expected to buttress the dollar to help keep the dollar relevant globally. Um, and that means that we will either seek to um, degrade the global impact of the euro or actually destroy the euro altogether and compel nation states to go back to national currencies. Um, for many Europeans, this is unthinkable. All they know is the euro. All they know is the unified currency model. But you know that model can't exist in a fractured Europe, and we have a deeply fractured Europe right now. And once the United States starts uh, picking, picking nation states off, I think that's what you're going to see. Europe is going to be a deeply divided continent, and there will be the haves and the have-nots. And the nations that stick with the United States are you will not be as friends and equals. You will be as colonial subjects who will are to exist to help promote and further the American empire. Yeah, because we are becoming an empire. We're a Western Hemisphere empire. What do you think the Monroe Doctrine is? It's basically laying claim to an entire region um, as American controlled, American dominated, a subset of America. Whether we succeed or not, or whether even we deserve to succeed or not, it's not the point. I'm not for this. Well, I mean, I know a lot of Europeans are probably getting mad at me for saying what I'm saying, but I'm not for this. I'm for good relations between the United States and Europe. I would love to go back to the relationship that we enjoyed in the 1970s and 1980s. That was ideal. But Europe has decided to go a different way. And I'm just telling you honestly what I think the price will be of these decisions. That this isn't going to be business as usual. This is the classic fool around, find out motto. And, the United States will bring those in who further our interests, but we're not here to further your interests. Uh, and it's a very sad state of affairs. I don't want the United States invading Venezuela. I don't want us bullying Peru. I don't want us seeking the breakup of Canada. I don't want us illegally occupying Greenland or Panama Canal. I'm not for any of this, but I'm simply saying, as an analyst, this is the reality of America as you see it. Um, and it's probably going to prevail because there's nothing in this hemisphere that can stop us. Um, and Europe probably isn't going to survive this as it currently exists. This is going to be a bad century for Europe going forward.
Yeah, I wrote a book in 2020, so 5 years ago, where it's called Europe as the Western Peninsula of Greater Eurasia, where I made this point that as the world becomes multipolar, the US have every incentive in the world to focus on other parts of the world. That is, yeah, Asia, Americas, and the dilemma for Europe was either, do everything you can to hold America here by surrendering, national interests, subordinate, or alternatively diversify. That is, keep good relationship with the U.S., but also integrate more into the Eurasian format. But then, you have to end the divisions in Europe, make peace with the Russians, end this Russophobic hostility. Otherwise, you're going to end up in a situation where you're going to fight the Russians while the Americans will see us a burden and bid you farewell. I mean, it just seems we picked every choice we made was like the worst possible scenario. It's quite depressing, I don't like to be right, but this is yeah, no, it's quite depressing to see what's happening now, though. Anyways, yes, our countries become more hostile to each other. I hope there will be some kind of a happy ending to this, though. So thank you very much for taking the time.
Well, thank you for having me.